Welcome to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McLernan, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. Before we dive in, I want to let you know about two very important things. Number one, the stories shared here are often gritty, raw, and vulnerable, and very likely will include speaking about sensitive topics suited for a mature audience. Number two, this podcast is also broadcast live on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So on whatever platform you follow myself or Freedom Nutrition Coaching, you have the opportunity to participate in this discussion. You can comment on the live stream, and we encourage your participation both by commenting and asking questions. And so this podcast is about exploring the stories that take place between the before and after photos, not just in the realm of weight loss, but in all areas of life. So let's dive in. All right, welcome back to another episode of Between the Before and After. I'm very excited to have with me a fellow Albertan, which is unusual. For those who are listening internationally, Alberta is the province that I live in Canada. And so it's not very often that I get to interview a fellow Canadian, because I think a lot of my guests come from south of the border or in maybe other areas of Canada and some of the bigger cities. Although you do live in Edmonton, is that right?
I'm in Grand Prairie.
Grand Prairie.
Yeah.
You're like 6 hours north of Edmonton, or maybe 4, depending on how you drive and what route you take. So
I was just gonna say more like 4.5.
Yeah. Long flat highways here in Alberta, that are good for moving quickly on, shall we say.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's start out with kind of what you do right now, and then we're going to pull on a few threads and figure out how you got there. So
what do I do right now? Well, I've been a dietitian for 30 years, which might have sounded like that was enough once upon a time in my life. I sort of dreamed for that, to be honest. But it definitely wasn't enough, which you'll find out more about. And so currently I combined my nutrition hat with a life coaching hat and launched a book and so forth. So it's sort of between the book and speaking and coaching at the same time.
Yeah. So you went into being a dietitian. You've been a dietitian for 30 years. Some people might not be able to, or struggle to distinguish between what is a dietitian versus what is, say, a nutritionist like myself. And how would you distinguish the two?
It's becoming a bit more distinct, where by law you call yourself a registered dietitian or nutritionist, at least in Alberta. Legally, if you have this particular training at the university level, Bachelor of Science and all these bells and whistles, and an internship. So you learn a lot about food. So the difference could be that we definitely have an uprising of a lot of health coaches and, great supporters out there. Dietitians are distinctly different in the way that they have that particular schooling that's 5 years all total. Right.
So might permit them to take a more medical type or prescriptive type approach to working with people.
Yeah. So you're in the hospital setting sometimes, not always, but it might be right there.
Could be helping somebody manage a chronic health condition, diabetes, or they might come to you and say, because I say legally, some like people might come to me and say, hey, I'm looking for help to lower my blood pressure or something like that. And I say, oh, cool. I can offer you some suggestions, but I can't give you anything prescriptive because that's outside of my scope of practice. So legally, I will get myself in hot water if I start trying to go down that path, but which is why I take a different focus in the work that I do. So 30 years of being a dietitian. Did you decide, what made you decide even to go down this path of being a dietitian? What sort of inspired you here?
Oh boy. It found me around, I can't pinpoint exactly, but about 12 or 13 years of age. And I didn't really realize that, except for that I was reading the Nutritional Almanac book, which is a book that might still exist. I'm not sure it would be updated by this point. At 13 versus Vogue magazine. And I thought that was really, really normal until people pointed out otherwise. But my folks sold vitamins just as a sidearm thing. It was called Shackley at the time, which still exists. And so I was surrounded by shelves of vitamins and books about it. So it found me in that sense.
Yeah, so you kind of developed a passion for health and wanting to be healthy, and maybe lived with more conscious awareness than those around you.
Yeah, and I ended up working my first job in alternative medicine.
Okay.
I don't know vitamins. I'll go to a place that sells the vitamins. So that starts a whole different side to being a dietitian as well.
Right. So we throw around this term alternative
Mhm.
medicine, and it's a
Yeah.
bit of a nebulous term. It's not necessarily clearly defined, and I think it runs quite a gamut between on the far end of the spectrum, what might fall into the category of well-meaning quackery to and medical malpractice to just sometimes completely ineffective methodologies. But somewhere in there, there's actually some really effective ways of working and treating people. In your sort of practice or application of alternative medicine, how are you working with people?
Well, first, it is such a long and broad topic in terms of it could be calcium supplements, which are recommended on a everyday basis as well, but falls in that category because you go to a health food store maybe to purchase them as well as a pharmacy. So there can be places where it's very normal and natural to talk about vitamin D supplementation, echinacea,
Mhm,
herb
mhm.
plants, where it's not the woo woo land and certainly safe. But I've developed how I work with people is you don't know what you don't know,
Mhm,
having an open mind. And what I really, really treasure about people who do seek out that type of support is they're usually very empowered.
mhm.
There's a very different energy coming from I'm going to do everything I can to equip myself, to empower myself and heal. But there can be
Yeah,
damage as well. So that's informed consent that they might seek out and explore options with. And staying open as a professional, I think, is where
yeah.
it's key.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we bump into here is this idea that there's competition amongst various types of practices, whether that's between like doctors and specific medical practitioners, versus those like I'm obviously lumped over in the alternative health realm as well, or independent health, because my certifications aren't regulated by a national regulatory body as of yet. That's coming in the next few months, but. So because of that, sometimes they're seen as competition, like you can't, why would you listen to this individual over here versus this one here? But really, I think the goal of the work that we're trying to do here is actually to equip and empower individuals to become participants in their own health, as opposed to a patient just sort of sitting back and waiting for a diagnosis.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, pardon me for saying this, but diseases are epidemic and they're climbing and
Mhm,
climbing.
mhm,
Neither side have figured it out. You
mhm.
know,
Yeah,
I wrote about it in my book as if to talk like you're watching two separated parents acting like they know how to parent, and the child has to remain sort of like, where do I go from here? And it
right.
does feel that way, I think, for the
Yeah,
individual who's trying to figure out which path. And the hands don't
yeah.
talk to the hands. And so they feel like they're maybe betraying by going one direction versus the other.
Yeah, that's actually I love that analogy. Actually, I'm a big fan of analogies, and just this idea that sorry, I just realized my phone is like not on silent. And I'm like, I don't want that ringing during a conversation, but this is live. Yeah. So one parent not talking to the other parent and creating a barrier of communication when in fact, what we should be striving for is actually more open communication, because I don't think like it's very rare that, that someone will find there is the one professional for me. I think we're moving into a place where we end up almost with, like a team of people that we sort of work with. Like I see sometimes a chiropractor, sometimes an osteopath, sometimes a naturopath, sometimes a massage therapist. Like there isn't any one individual and only one for me. But I think this comes from maybe the scarcity mindset in the realm of practitioners, where they're like, no, 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 I need to hoard all of the clients to myself. And I think, well, we actually better serve people when we say like, I'm not going to try and hoard you to myself. I want you to achieve the best health possible,
Mhm.
and if I can play a role in that, awesome. And when it goes outside of my role or my ability to do that, I'm going to point you in the direction of someone who's well equipped to help you.
Yeah, very well said. One thing I distinctly will say to people who are trying to figure out which part of the or what side to pick from,
Yeah.
if you're having a heart attack, you're not going to run to your naturopath. If
Right.
you're going to run to the hospital. If it's
Yeah.
something that is has time, it's in the preventative world, in the what I would call dis-ease before it becomes the disease.
Mm-mm-mm.
There could be an awful lot that a person can equip themselves with, and researching and searching. And I think knowledge is power in that sense, to explore both sides.
Yeah.
Another way of putting it too, if it's okay for me to say, it's I think we've had in the past where it's been a lot of silos in the way that we approach things, as opposed to, they say mind, body, spirit, but are we integrating all three in our practice? And if you're not treating the whole individual. And I have way more to say about that, which I'm not sure if I'll hijack the whole conversation, so I'll let you into it.
Well, I think the idea here, like I have this picture, and it wouldn't really make a great logo, but it's kind of a picture of a connect the dots drawing. I don't know if you remember those as a kid.
Yeah,
and
sure.
It's a connect the dots drawing of a person. And it's like, what we're actually trying to do here is connect the dots of a whole person. And it's like each one of us can maybe influence, one connection between the dots, or sometimes a couple of connections between the dots. But very often, very few of us can influence the whole person or the whole being. We might have some clues or some suggestions or some ideas around, hey, this might be good for you. But I think the other thing you touched on that's really important is, our modern medical system is one of the most advanced in the world, which is fantastic. We're very privileged to have that sort of at our disposal for all of its flaws and struggles and, bureaucratic issues that it comes with. We still have a pretty good system compared to a lot of the world. What it's well equipped to do is to take care of immediate life-threatening issues, triage and trauma, acute care.
Yeah.
But because that's the focus, and perhaps we as a society have kind of been stumbling into this and not taking care of ourselves, not becoming sort of our own best health advocates, what this means is that system is burdened down with managing chronic conditions and doesn't have the capacity to help people with preventative. And that sort of moves into kind of like a little bit more of what you're trying to do and the work that you're trying to continue with.
Yes. Nailed it.
But, kind of more to like your own personal story as well, because you said when we were communicating via email, you mentioned that you went through some struggles yourself.
Yes.
And I think this is where stories get interesting, because we look at health professionals, and maybe sometimes there's the assumption that because you're a health professional, because you have this body of knowledge, because this is what you do for profession or a living, that somehow that's going to mean that you have everything perfect.
I don't. No.
Really? How about that? Hey. Yeah. And very often, actually, we find ourselves going into, or at least I don't know if I can speak for you, but like find myself going into this practice because of my own struggles, the things that I have battled with. And I think what allows me to work so effectively with people when I do, like I'm picky about who I work with, but is because I have the lived experience. I don't just have like the textbook knowledge. I've got a couple of textbooks sitting beside me. I don't just have that book knowledge, but I have the lived human experience that allows me to enter and understand and show empathy and compassion for that. And maybe that's a piece of the puzzle that's very often been missing when we try to take this prescriptive model, which is like, eat these specific foods, lift these weights at this time, and do this and do this and do this, and really, kind of almost divorce ourselves from the fact that we're actually working with real human beings with real human struggles. And something like eating broccoli might be, number 27 on their list of priorities in life.
Yes. Yes. It's being relatable is really what you're, I think, touching on. And I had to learn that lesson definitely through my own.
Right. So where did things start to go a little bit sideways for you then, if we could put it that way?
Yeah. The quote, you cannot solve a problem with the level of thinking that causes the problem.
I think it's often attributed to Mr. Einstein.
Yes, indeed. That's very much. So I'm in my 40s at the time, and I had been passionately delivering nutrition information. I swear it's been my calling, passionately delivering it. And it was one thing to beat on the drum and sell the cell on that at the symptom level, as you described it. It was quite another when I was starting to now have my own health journey, where my body went into this place where it thought I was in menopause and pregnancy at the same time. That's called hormonal upheaval, big time.
Yeah. Is that a medical definition of hormonal upheaval?
Not necessarily, no. I had a lump on my pituitary gland. That's the medical part of it.
Right.
And so it was producing and doing these off-balance things. Well, that led me into feeling more tired and not necessarily wanting to eat broccoli as you described it. Lifting your head off to go for a walk. It was something I would have said, just go for a walk. You just make the time, just go for the walk. Well, now I was in the place of, oh gosh, when you're so tired, it wasn't that simple. Plus my husband had his own symptoms going on, which is a story in and of itself, but very, very connected. And it actually was at this point where this is going into about a 5-year span where I thought, well, I'm no longer the billboard of health. I'm throwing in the towel. I am retiring. If I do not have impact with my messaging, that is it. So
Was
that's
there,
the plan.
yeah, were you maybe starting to be beset by feelings maybe of imposter syndrome or something along those lines where you say, like,
Oh,
I've
yeah.
been preaching and practicing, talking about this health message for so many years, and now here I am running into these health problems that maybe, despite all of my knowledge and experience, I can't seem to figure out and or solve, and maybe
All of
more
it.
than that. Like, yeah,
All of it, because you feel fundamentally flawed. You feel like you're a fraud. Like, all this rhymes, apparently. I
yeah,
felt like, if I am saying this, but I'm not able to do it, it's going to come bite me in the whatever. I don't know if we can swear
mhm.
on here, so I won't do that. But
And we try to keep it PG here.
well, bite me in the, you know what?
Yeah.
It felt like somebody's going to discover me, just like you said, imposter syndrome.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
where do I go, since I had been building this for years, this career passion? And if I'm not doing this, now what? So now your confidence is waning. And now what? So I was
Yeah.
lost. Like I said, I was going to retire until I discovered life coaching.
Right. So you
Then
were a flawed fraud. Say
I
that
was-
5 times. In your eyes, I mean, I don't mean that's actually what you were, but that's what it
that's
feels
what
like.
it felt like. That's what it felt like. Plus my husband's health too, on top
Right.
of
And
that.
then you think, like, again, here I am, a dietitian, and I can't seem to help the
Mhm.
person that's closest to me who literally cohabits with me, and so on. But I
Yeah.
think we have to go through these kinds of experiences, you're right, to really become transformed ourselves. And in order to work with people in a transformative capacity, we ourselves have to go through this transformation. And sometimes it sounds like maybe, I don't know, lofty or sort of esoteric messaging, but in my own backstory, I was really like what I call like a macros and meal plan kind of coach, very prescriptive. Let me give you these variables because those are the things that I can control. I wasn't really equipped to work with the human struggle because there was work that hadn't been done in my life. And so I
Yeah.
think if, it might be accurate to say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, though, that because of this struggle and experience that you went through, it's actually one of the best things that could have happened to you because it's kind of leading you to the place of what you're doing now.
Yes. It was as if things were in the head knowledge, and
Hmm.
that process allowed me to bring it to a molecular level, for lack of better words, and
Hmm.
really made me more relatable and diving deep into going past the symptoms.
Right. So, you said this covers like a 5-year span, and of course, it's in a narrow window of time. It's hard to necessarily cover a 5-year span. But what was kind of the lowest of the low for you? Where did you feel like you'd hit rock bottom?
When I watched my husband get up one morning, who was suffering from gout, which is a real painful disease of the joint, sorry, like an
Yes. Yeah.
arthritis. And he hit the floor with his foot in such a searing pain that he had to crawl to the bathroom
Yeah.
in the morning. And he's a businessman. He's going to put on a suit, and he can't even put on dress shoes. He's putting on sneakers basically with the suit,
Yeah.
and he's pretty teary eyed. And I'm not able to really help him, because it's one thing to say, this is what you should eat, and this is what you should not eat. That wasn't
Right.
having an impact. And
Right.
when I seen that, I thought that's it. That's it. Because I could see writing on the wall that that was going to lead to potentially a heart attack. And you put things in perspective real quick when you're going through it yourself,
Yeah.
which, as you said, you almost need to really have a deeper connection, I think, on the soul level.
Yeah. So, how do you start digging yourself out of this place?
Well, I use a particular assessment that I use as an analogy, like you like analogies, as 4 tires on a vehicle.
Hmm.
And so I look at the 4 tires on the vehicle being everything that we're deep rooted in: our career, time and money, our relationships, and our career. So in my husband's case, and in mine, really, well, in his especially, he felt like he was checking his soul at the door every day, going to work.
Right. Yeah.
And so he ate his passion. Like, it was as if this is how I'll remedy my deep rooted depression almost.
Okay, so like using food as a way, as like an emotional anesthetic, because he's doing something for money, which probably maybe brings a certain material standard of living, but
Yes.
feeling kind of hollow on the inside. If you're comfortable sharing it, is it all right to ask what it was that he was doing?
Oh, yes. Working for a corporate and communications company, part owner, so high up
Yeah.
there in the ranks, money having to be the reason for the being there, as well as the commitment and the responsibility at that level.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a missing piece, and like checking your soul at the door every day at work and then picking it up on the way home. That
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
really the mindset.
And
And
was it like work that just that he simply didn't enjoy doing, or was it work that he felt like conflicted his values and maybe was detrimental to, fellow humans, if we're saying checking your soul at the door?
as we did a deep dive, it was actually not so much that it was the work itself that he wasn't enjoying. It was that he was so left brained
Hmm.
and not developing a right brained part of his life, which is music.
Right.
And so, as
Yeah.
much as he was loving it, it sounded too woo woo for him or something of that effect. And through some work, it was as if his desire was to be in a band as a lead singer.
Yeah.
And when that came front center on stage, pardon the pun, his health
Yeah.
came
Yeah.
along for the journey
Yeah.
rather than the
Interesting.
other way around. So working on what the real deep crux of what we're really passionate about became the real pull. I call it a tow truck
I
because of
like
the
that.
analogy. Yeah.
So, because in this case, he found something that he was passionate about and he was able to indulge that passion and sort of live it.
Mhm.
There wasn't the need to use food or other substances as like emotional anesthetics because now that need was being met in a meaningful and purposeful way.
Yeah. Honestly, I think what happens when we get into a particular age, 40s and up, maybe,
Yep.
the vanity reason for your health goals doesn't seem to pull up enough slack. It doesn't really
Mm-mm.
drive us the same. And we need
Yeah.
something else. And we need to figure what that is. And then when we do, for him anyway, it was like this. Okay, to be on the stage, what would it take for me to look good? What would it take for me to have better capacity of my diaphragm to sing? And I thought, well, all the things I've said all along, go for walks and eat right. But it didn't
Mhm.
have the same incentive.
So I think where this is really really valuable is we're talking about finding what I call the emotionally compelling reason.
Yeah.
And we kind of need that because really the process of getting to a place of good health, in one sense, isn't overly complex. Like our biology is reasonably well understood, and the fundamental principles of a healthy lifestyle are really, if most people were to, manage their stress, get quality sleep, eat mostly whole foods, be well hydrated, they're probably going to enjoy reasonably good health. But that doesn't really excite anybody. It doesn't really get anybody out of bed, doesn't, and so to do those actions on repeat can feel very boring and very dull unless we can find that there's actually a bigger purpose to this. And in the case of your husband, it's like, so that I can go on stage and I can sing and I can indulge this passion for as long as possible, where my health isn't necessarily the limiting factor for me to be able to do this.
Yes. And at the end of the day, we bust a few paradigms and say it's not actually I don't have time to do the activity or the eating well. It's I don't have the energy.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
what would dial up the energy?
Hmm.
And usually we find something that we desire. When we have when we have a desire ahead of us, we find the time, we find the desire, the
Right.
energy comes, right? So it's
Right.
to that effect.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Our calendar in particular, but also our bank balance will show our priorities. Um,
Yes.
and there's some fundamental limitations to that because and I want to be careful like how I phrase that because sometimes I can sound callous saying that because I mean we recognize that people do have to work within certain limitations and I just actually had a conversation in one of my other podcasts about like privilege and sort of privilege is the things that you don't have to think about, but with that caveat kind of sort of out of the way, we can say the kind of the door opened to indulge those things, and because it became a priority that he was passionate about, it meant that, hey, eating vegetables is helping me sing better. Cool, I'll eat vegetables because I want to sing better. I found that emotional incentive.
Yes. That's precisely it.
And then so for you, so he found his thing and you found your thing to kind of, because you were hitting rock bottom yourself, you were struggling with your health, you were feeling like the flawed fraud is I like that term, that alliteration there, and again I say that sort of tongue in cheek, right? Because obviously you're still a consummate professional. I don't want to diminish your professional accomplishments at all, but somewhere in there you go, I found a reason to come to do this again, but to do this in a different way, a more meaningful way.
Mhm. Yeah, my resurrection, my legacy-ish feeling that resurrected in me was writing a book and discovering the life coaching tools, and just how am I going to get the message out there that it starts at the mind level, not at the symptom level? And what can we do that can bring people into this holistic, like the mind, body, soul integrated? And how could we implement that, and not just here's your pill, here's your diet, here's your pill, here's your diet, here's your symptom, here's your pill, here's your diet. On and on that treadmill went. And there's a whole series of events that takes place before the symptoms. Right. And so me finding that piece to write it in a book format, who knew? I didn't realize how much it would resurrect a second wind, or I'm calling it now, my best half is in my second half. And that's what's happening.
Right. There is something about wanting to sort of tinker and fix and find symptoms and control variables and things like that. But the reality is, by the time symptoms begin to express themselves, there's been an underlying problem that we likely have not been paying attention to. Even if our body's been giving us the signals, we've been sort of ignoring and dismissing those signals because maybe we didn't want to acknowledge the uncomfortable reality of what they might mean. And so it gets to a place where now a symptom expresses itself and the body shouts louder and louder and louder until, for your husband, for example, it's trying to plant your foot and falling down because of the pain. And for you, it's lying in bed with maybe like no energy, being like, can't even get up and go for a walk. Like I've got this hormonal cyclone going through my body, and I just, everything, it's like a washing machine on the inside thrashing around until you find something that brings you this moment of clarity. And so as we're winding down here, I want to make sure that we give a little bit of attention to your book as well, because the process of writing a book, again, it sounds really cool, really glamorous to be like a published author and to write a book, but I can't imagine that was necessarily an easy process either.
No, not for me anyway. But it became easier in some ways. I should actually give credit to the fact that there's a lot of great curriculum that I've learned that really did make that part easy, but it's my own internal that would be for most people. Once you get through that, you can start putting the train on the tracks. But it took a little bit to get it on the tracks, for sure.
Right. And so if somebody was thinking like, hey, I want to, maybe I want to write a book, what advice would you give them?
I would suggest that they put a momentum in place, like 15 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, and really honestly stick to a small number, just like you would for somebody to work out. You start with a daunting amount, the chances are not. So I developed a mantra for myself to take massive imperfect action.
Right.
And that allowed me to just go, okay, so 15 minutes. You never know. And sometimes it ended up being an hour, but 15 is all I needed to do. And then it started to get the train on the tracks.
Yeah, I call that setting can't miss goals, or CMGs. And the concept is we lower the barrier to entry to the point where our brain puts up very little resistance. For some people, the CMG might be getting your gym clothes. Cool. After that, you can decide whether you want to keep them on and work out or take them off again. You know, but whatever until we lower that sort of resistance to the point where it's like it's negligible resistance. Cool, because you can always build on it when you're trying to pattern a behavior, and it's a lot easier to keep going than it is to do the stop-start thing.
Yes, it's as if you're taking your conscious mind and your subconscious mind and collaborating together is what you've done. And by the way, you've done a very good job from everything I've read and been listening to with your podcast. I mean, you have a brilliant health journey as a dietitian. I just want to
well, thank you.
Moment and congratulate you. I think it's brilliant that you're even maintaining. That's
that's extremely hard. I will say, I didn't realize it was going to be a lifelong work either. And it's the message I want to get to people too, is like, I didn't just like lose the weight and magically it stays off the rest of my life and I'm on easy street. It's like, this is something I managed for the rest of my life. And I call it my biological reality. And so, but I made peace with it.
Yeah. The diet industry has kind of misled us to think it's a destination, and it's not. It's a continual journey. If you want green grass, you water it and mow it, right? Continually. And then you water it and mow it and mow it. It's to me more of a destination or a journey than a destination.
It is. So we'll give people a little teaser here to close things out. So you've written the book called The Domino Diet. Why should people check out the book and read it? How is their life going to be different when they're finished reading it?
Well, it is very different. The word diet does appear on the title, which was a bit of a tug of war for me.
Yeah, I bet.
Because it does have a negative connotation, like another 4-letter word.
Yeah.
But I was brought to the real meaning of the word diet, which comes from the Greek origin word dieta, which means a way of life. And so technically speaking, by following the thought formula or the domino formula, I dive deep into how to bring it into a way of life. The diet actually kind of comes after the fact. Work on mindset and breath control. Breath control is major for hormonal balance, which I had to learn. And so it really does take us to a deeper level and to the beginning of where the fires start versus just putting them out, which is what I was doing in acute care. And now I am able to say in private practice that we can really, really do a lot more preventative work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's fantastic. And it's been a real pleasure chatting with you today. I love the fact, like I said, that you're from my home province. I think that's so cool. I love supporting fellow locals who are working hard to improve the health of our population, because this is not a one individual job. This is the work of many people. And so I really want to encourage you to keep going. And so if people want to find you, where can they find you online?
The easiest has been to Google anything, the Domino Diet.
Okay.
The website and the name, everything kind of comes up, and it's easier to remember than the other.
It is. You know, from a marketing standpoint, the Domino Diet, that's great. It's very memorable. There's alliteration. And I agree with you. Like, I have this sort of tenuous relationship with diet, but it's like maybe the perspective that a temporary change. And it's like, no, when we embrace the fact that this is a new way of living, then we become kind of okay with that. So just to close things out, if you were to sort of summarize a life lesson or some words of wisdom to share with people, a little nugget they can take with them and say, this was time well spent listening to this episode, what would you share with them?
How you do one thing is how you do everything. You touched on it slightly earlier as well. So how you're looking at your career, your relationships, your health, if it's mediocre, are you inflated, flourishing, or deflated? All of it is connected, and it generally starts with the mind. And you touched on it also with just starting with these small actions, and you will end up with big results. But put the train on the tracks and come at it with reality. And explore your options for both sides of medicine.
Love that. Just an open-minded curiosity. That's awesome.
Yes.
Well, Karie, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, John.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, or leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become, and I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.
Anyone can come from any place of brokenness and destitution and build an amazing life.